Okay, speaking of Kurt Cignetti, speaking of hiring practices and all that, I wanted to ask you kind of your I don't know, first impressions, takeaways, or anything like that. Just kind of the thought of like, okay, Auburn goes and hires Alex Golesh, and I know we talked about this beforehand. You haven't really talked to Golesh a ton. I think you would have
Not
seen
one
him
on
at,
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
you'd have seen him at in Destin, but like, there's so much of that where the thought process is like if you get somebody who's doing really well and try to implement a lot of what they're doing, even the players and the staff, like maybe you could do something like that. Maybe you could hit like that. That's obviously part of what the argument was at Auburn with him. But like, what do you think about that? What do you think about that model, or is it just like you know what USF? I mean, Indiana is going to be its own thing forever.
No,
Like,
no.
yeah.
I don't think they are. I mean, I think that that is a huge part of what we saw this offseason. Auburn's a great example of it. You bring your quarterback, you bring like the key players, but you're bringing players that you believe can like help speed up the process and set a culture. So you're like this was something that all the Indiana players talked about and looking back on what things that helped. Okay, here's how we practice, here's how it goes, here's what this coach is like, here's what they mean when they say this. Like you can be an extension of the coaching staff, but also just like know how it goes so you don't have all that breaking in period. I think nowadays with no patience anywhere you have to speed these things up. So Auburn is a great example, especially obviously when you bring one of the best quarterbacks in the country with you, so that immediately gives you a boost, but then obviously it also then attracts other players out of the portal. Like there's just a lot that you like about it, but it's just like it's bringing enough players that there's enough to have a core. And I think you saw that basically Oklahoma State this year is North Texas. They just like lifted
Hmm.
up the roster and moved it to Stillwater. And they did the same thing with their quarterback, right? So these are quarterbacks that could have gone, kind of like created those bidding wars and everything we were talking about. They decided to stick with their coach who took a chance on them, whatever, and they just move up with them, which I like and I respect that. And so I think you saw that in some of these other places too. John Summerall was in an interesting spot because of the level of success that Tulane had, how late they played into the season,
Hmm.
not wanting to like ruin what he had built at Tulane and then like take everyone with him to
Hmm.
Florida. So you have to balance that too, because I have talked to coaches who were like, hey, I wish I had taken more. I wish I had done this, but I didn't want to like
Hmm.
piss everybody off on the way out. So I think that that's a dynamic that's real of like, how do you take some players and which players do you take with you? But yeah, I think that's huge, especially with the way that the world works now. I think it's a huge selling point when you're interviewing a sitting head coach that they can bring players, that is
Yeah.
part of the system. I was just up at Michigan State to sit down with Pat Fitzgerald, and like that was a thing. People there, when they hired him, they were like, he's not bringing any players. He's not coaching right now. Like he's
Hmm.
not, like you don't have that built
Yeah.
in benefit. So like, how has that already helped? Have you noticed how much that's been
Oh
a
yeah.
factor already?
I mean, and I think for Auburn, when you've had five straight losing seasons, which again is an insane thing to say here, and you struggled so much on offense, we go out first day of spring practice, and Byron Brown is throwing the ball to guys he was used to at USF. He's taking snaps from the center that he had played with. He'd been in the system, and it was like you walked out there, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't a first practice for these guys.
Mm,
Like,
hmm.
this is we're
It's like
just jumping."
their
Yeah,
80th practice or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think while I think Auburn's going to have some issues this, the schedule's brutal as always. That offensive line is just the biggest question mark ever because it's all brand new. There's that familiarity there, and it's like I can see why. Like, yes, are you going to be Indiana? Like, the Indiana case is so fascinating to me because I have a contributor. We have a contributor of ours who is writing a piece next week when I'm on vacation, and he did this like really interesting breakdown of how do you measure talent in college football now with the transfer portal, and like the blue chip ratio doesn't really work anymore, and like how do
Hmm.
you like so trying to figure out more formulas, and even if you come up with any formula, Indiana breaks all of that because it's like, hey, they just got a bunch of like really good talent evaluations with 3 stars and just hit like crazy on them, and like Signetti might be the outlier, but like you were saying, the framework of it of you guys know what I want to do. Come on in. We'll bring it up. You'll get paid more. You'll get to play on a bigger stage. It'll help you get to the NFL. Like, come on and do that. And then you build that out. I think that's a really good thing because you want to be able to hit the ground running. Like, Auburn fans, all they want this year from Alex Golesh is just have a winning season. Just have a winning season.
Have an improved offense, a
Yeah.
functional offense.
And Byron Brown won't be here next year. And some of these other guys that came over won't be here next year. But you rent them for a year to kickstart it. And then meanwhile, can you build around that? Because look, like I think at the like if you're Signetti, you might be the outlier. You might be the whisperer of like everything. But like if you're at the very, very top of the Big Ten, the Michigans, the Ohio States, Oregon's, USC, all that, you got to recruit like a madman. If you're anybody in the SEC, you got to do that. And especially if you're Auburn. And one of the big storylines of this summer has been before coaching a single game, Alex Golesh has right now the best. This is the best an Auburn recruiting class has looked like in the month of June, late June, maybe ever. They're a top 10 class. And it's like, you got to be able to kind of combine those, that kind of hybrid
Yeah.
approach.
Well, and even if you only get some of those guys for 1 year, it's still worth it.
Oh, yeah,
right?
100%. Especially, again, 5 straight losing seasons. Just win. Just win more
Right.
games than you lose.
Right.
And people will be like, that's great. We worth it. Awesome.
But
like,
I think it's the right strategy right now. I really do. And I think that it's a huge selling point. It was a huge selling point, clearly, across the carousel this year because you saw a lot of these like G5 coaches move up and bring a bunch of players with them, and they were all winning at a very high level where they were. And we just saw like Kurt Signetti did this with a bunch of guys he recruited to JMU a couple of years after they moved up to FBS. Like these were not world beaters, but they developed into them and they were the right guys, and a bunch of them got drafted. And I mean, like Fernando Mendoza was not the crown jewel of the quarterback market last year.
No.
I'm not saying he didn't get paid. He got paid, but like that was not the one we were talking about. You want to know when I realized that Fernando Mendoza was going to be really good? You'll appreciate this.
Okay. When he beat Auburn at Cal?
No,
Because that's when I realized it.
Well,
he beat Auburn and Cal in 24, and I was like, oh dear, like this guy's good.
That wasn't the 98 yards with my boys, right?
Yeah.
That was the
no, it wasn't.
I think that was a Pac-12 game.
It was
or
a Pac,
something.
yeah. But he came in and like Auburn had an awesome defense, and it just did not matter. Like,
yeah, and he had like no offensive line at Cal too, which was so I liked him a lot because as you know, like we're all football junkies. We're staying up late and watching the late games. So I think really only people who were super in on him. I mean, you had the Calgorithm, you had some of that, but like the entirety of the season, people who were staying up late. And so, but I realized that he was going to be really good at Indiana because I get a text message. We got Fernando Mendoza. He just committed to us, signed by Kurt Signetti. Like he got my phone number to tell me that bit of news.
He knew, man.
And that's when I was like, we need to be talking about this quarterback pickup for Indiana.
That guy's tough because they were fresh off that playoff berth. Like, but
everyone thought they were frauds. Then everyone thought
Correct.
that was just their schedule. It's been a fascinating like period of 2 years in college football with them and how it's kind of changed the way that people like what you were talking about view success. Like how are you supposed to build a team? What works now? Like all of that had to come into question.